She heard 3 words and her entire body went cold. Not from the draft cutting through the marble corridor of Vitali Tower on a bitter New York evening. Not from exhaustion, though her feet had been aching since 4 in the morning. Cold from the voice. Cold from what it said. Cold from the fact that she understood every syllable and wished to God she didn't. Selene Carter pressed her back against the wall of the 41st floor service corridor, mop handle clutched in both hands, heart slamming against her ribs, and did not breathe. The stairwell door at the end of the hall was cracked open 2 inches. 2 men stood just inside it. They were speaking Russian. Fluent, fast, the kind of Russian that doesn't come from textbooks, it comes from back rooms and cold winters and men who've done things they can never undo. Selene knew that Russian because her grandmother had spoken it every day until the day she died, in a cramped apartment in Brighton Beach where the radiator hissed and the walls were thin and the language wrapped around everything like smoke. She'd grown up bilingual and never once thought it would matter. Until tonight. The device is mounted, the first voice said. Rear axle housing. Remote activation, 50-meter range. And the trigger window? 6:15. He leaves every night at 6:15. 11 years, never once changed. A pause. The flick of a lighter. Morozov wants it clean. No trace. Just the car, the man, and silence. Selene's grip on the mop tightened until her knuckles ached. She knew whose car was parked in the private bay at the base of this tower. She'd seen it every night for 2 years. Long, black, bulletproof, or so everyone thought. She knew whose name was on the 47th floor in letters of brushed steel above the door. Caruso Vitali. CEO of Vitali Capital. The most powerful private equity firm on the eastern seaboard. A man she had never spoken to. A man who had never once looked at her. A man who was going to walk out of this building in 12 minutes and step into a car rigged to kill him. Selene Carter was 29 years old, the daughter of a Brooklyn schoolteacher, working nights at Vitali Tower to cover her mother's dialysis and her own rent in a studio apartment where the hot water worked 3 days out of 5. She had a literature degree from UConn that had never once opened a door for her, a sister in California she called every Sunday, and exactly 0 connections to anyone on the 47 floors above her. She was, in every way that this city counted, nobody. But she had heard what she heard. And she was her grandmother's granddaughter. She moved. If this story already has your pulse racing, hit that like and subscribe, because it only gets more intense from here. She pushed the service cart into the alcove, stripped off her outer uniform layer, and walked toward the main elevator bank like she had somewhere to be. Her mind was running the math. 12 minutes. 1 elevator. 41 floors of marble and glass between her and the lobby security desk. She hit the button. Waited. The elevator doors opened and she stepped in, catching her reflection in the mirrored panel, dark eyes wide, jaw set, the ghost of her grandmother's stubbornness written all over her face. She thought about the voice in the stairwell. The casual way it said, "the man in silence," as if a human life were a line item. As if Caruso Vitali were a problem to be solved rather than a person to be warned. Whatever he was, arrogant, cold, unreachable, the kind of man who moved through the world like he'd built it himself, he did not deserve to die tonight. Not if she could stop it. The elevator descended. Selene watched the floor numbers drop and made herself a promise. She would not be invisible tonight. Not if it cost her everything. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that stopping the explosion was only the beginning. The real thing that would change her life forever was already waiting in the lobby. And his name was Caruso Vitali. The lobby security desk at Vitali Tower looked like it belonged in a government facility, granite countertop, for monitors, 2 officers always on duty, a direct line to NYPD Midtown. It looked like a place built to take threats seriously. It wasn't. Not for her. The officer at the desk was named Garrett. Late 40s, thick neck, the particular expression of a man who had decided long ago that nothing in his night shift would ever be genuinely interesting. He looked at Selene's maintenance badge, then at her face, then back at the badge, and his expression didn't change. "I need to report a credible threat against Mr. Vitali," Selene said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced it in the elevator. "There are 2 men in the 41st floor north stairwell. They were speaking Russian. I understood them clearly, they said there's a device on Mr. Vitali's car, rear axle housing, remote detonation, triggered at 6:15. Garrett blinked once. You speak Russian? Yes. You're on the night maintenance crew? Yes. He looked at her for a moment the way people look at something they've already decided to ignore. Ma'am, I can't act on, there are 9 minutes until 6:15, Selene said. 9 minutes. All I'm asking is that someone checks the car. I hear you, Garrett said, in the tone of someone who absolutely did not hear her. I'll log the report and notify the appropriate, there isn't time to log it. Garrett's jaw tightened. Step back from the desk, please. She didn't step back. She leaned forward. His name is Caruso Vitali. He owns this building. If something happens to him because you didn't check a car, that's on you. Not me. You. Garrett picked up his radio. For 1 second, Selene thought he was going to act. Then she heard what he said into it. Can someone come to the lobby desk? I have a maintenance employee causing a disturbance. Her stomach dropped. She turned from the desk and looked across the lobby. The executive elevator bank was on the far wall. A different world of polished bronze and indirect lighting, separated from the service elevators by 30 feet of marble and an invisible line that everyone in this building understood without being told. A man in a dark suit stood near it. Tall. Sharp-jawed. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace, it comes from control. He was watching her. Not the way Garrett was watching her. He was watching her the way you watch something that has caught your attention and you're not yet sure why. Selene crossed the lobby. The man in the dark suit stepped into her path. Ma'am. This area is restricted to executive staff and, I need to speak to Mr. Vitali. That's not possible. His car has a bomb in it. The man's eyes sharpened. Just slightly. A crack in the professional wall. Who told you that? I heard it myself. 41st floor stairwell, 2 men speaking Russian, 40 minutes before his scheduled departure. They said rear axle housing, remote trigger, 6:15 activation. I speak Russian fluently. I know what I heard. Something moved behind his eyes. Calculation. Then doubt winning over it. Mr. Vitali does not receive unscheduled, there are 7 minutes, Selene said. 7. If I'm wrong, you fire me. Fine. But if I'm right and you do nothing, you'll spend the rest of your life knowing you could have stopped it. The man, whose name she would later learn was Drago, head of Caruso Vitali's personal detail, looked at her for 4 full seconds. Then he looked at his watch. Then he did something that surprised her completely. He said, wait here. And he walked toward the executive elevator. Selene exhaled for what felt like the first time in 10 minutes. But the relief lasted exactly 4 seconds. Because the elevator opened before Drago reached it. And Caruso Vitali stepped out. He was taller than she expected. Darker. His suit was the color of midnight and his jaw was set in the expression of a man already mentally halfway home, phone in hand, moving at the pace of someone who had never once been stopped by anything. He didn't see her. Of course he didn't. She was nobody. She was invisible. She was the woman the whole building had already decided didn't matter. And she had 6 minutes to make him listen. She stepped forward. What happened next, nobody in that lobby would ever forget it. Mr. Vitali. Her voice cut across the lobby like a blade. Clean. Certain. Impossible to ignore. He stopped. Not because he wanted to. Because something in the quality of that voice, not loud, not panicked, just absolutely certain, caught him the way very few things ever did. He turned. His eyes found her immediately. Dark uniform. Maintenance badge. A face he had never seen in 2 years of occupying this building, or maybe he had seen it and simply never registered it, which, some part of him noted with discomfort, was probably the more accurate version. Who are you? Not rude. Just exact. The way he said everything. Selene Carter. Night maintenance, floor 38 through 42. She said it like she was in a boardroom. Like she had every right. Something about that made him pause, just slightly. Your car has a device on it, she said. Rear axle housing. Remote detonation. Triggered at 6:15. Caruso Vitali had been the target of 3 assassination attempts in 8 years. He knew what fear looked like on the face of someone delivering that kind of information. This woman did not look afraid. She looked like she was stating a fact she wished she didn't have to state. That was the thing that made him not immediately dismiss her. Drago. He said it without looking away from her. Sir. Who is she? Night crew. She came to the lobby desk first. Garrett logged it as a disturbance. A muscle in Caruso's jaw tightened. He looked at Selene. How do you know this? I was buffing the east corridor on 41. The north stairwell door was cracked. 2 men inside, speaking Russian. I speak Russian, grew up bilingual, Brighton Beach. They said the device was set before his scheduled departure. They used the name Morozov. And there it was. The thing that changed everything. Not the word bomb. Not the word device. The name Morozov. Caruso's expression didn't break. It never broke. But something behind his eyes shifted, a tectonic thing, deep and slow and enormous. His hand stopped moving. His phone went still. He looked at Selene Carter for a long moment, the kind of look that strips a person down to what they actually are, not what they're wearing or where they work or what floor they clean. Tell me exactly what you heard, he said. Word for word. So she told him. In Russian. The exact phrases, the exact cadence, the exact pause between sentences where the lighter had clicked. She watched his face as she spoke and she saw something she hadn't expected. Not just alarm. Recognition. He knew that name. He knew what it meant. And he knew she was telling the truth. He turned to Drago. Nobody touches that car. Get Rodriguez and the secondary team in the parking bay now. I want the building locked and the north stairwell sealed. He pulled out a different phone, not the one he'd been holding, and made a call in 4 seconds flat. It's Vitali. Possible device, confirmed intelligence. I need bomb disposal at the 5th Avenue Tower, private bay, immediately. Then he looked back at Selene. She was still standing there. Perfectly still. Not shaking, not crying, not waiting to be thanked. Just, present. Like someone who had done what needed doing and was ready to deal with whatever came next. You came to the lobby desk first, he said. Yes. Garrett didn't act. No. You came to Drago. Yes. Drago hesitated. She looked at Drago briefly, then back at Caruso. He was about to act. You came out before he had the chance. Drago exhaled quietly beside him. Caruso noted the grace in that, the way she'd refused to throw a man under the bus when she had every reason to. He noticed a lot of things about Selene Carter in those 30 seconds. He filed all of them away. Come with me, he said. It wasn't a request. But it wasn't cold either. It was something she hadn't heard from anyone in this building in 2 years. It was the voice of someone who had decided she mattered. She followed him. And she had absolutely no idea what that decision was about to cost her, or what it was about to give her. They waited in the second-floor conference room. Caruso stood at the window. Selene sat at the edge of a chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent and kept her hands flat on her knees to stop them from trembling. Not from fear. From the strange weight of having done something enormous and now having nothing to do but wait and feel the size of it. The room was all clean lines and soft lighting and the quiet hum of a city that had no idea what was happening in this building right now. Drago stood by the door. 2 other members of the security team had sealed the lobby. Down in the private bay, Rodriguez and the bomb disposal unit were underneath a black car that gleamed under fluorescent lights like it had never imagined being the site of something this ugly. Caruso hadn't sat down. He hadn't spoken. He stood with his back to her, one hand braced on the window frame, watching the city below with the controlled stillness of a man who had learned long ago that stillness was the only form of honesty he could afford. Then the radio crackled. Rodriguez's voice came through flat and certain. Device confirmed. Rear axle housing, exactly as reported. Remote trigger, 50-meter activation range. It's live. Disposal in progress. Selene closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. When she opened them, Caruso had turned around. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on a person's face before, not in real life, not directed at her. It wasn't gratitude. It was deeper than that. It was the look of a man confronting something he had spent years refusing to confront. The fact that he was not, as he had believed, untouchable. The fact that the system he had built, the money, the security, the walls, had failed him completely. And a woman mopping floors had not. He crossed the room. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Not behind the head of the table, not at a power seat distance. Directly across. Close enough that she could see the tiredness around his eyes that the sharply cut suit and the controlled jaw couldn't quite hide. "Selene Carter," he said quietly. "Yes. You've worked in this building for 2 years. 26 months. I've never seen you before tonight." It wasn't an apology. It was an acknowledgement. And somehow that was more disarming than an apology would have been. "I know," she said. He looked at her hands on the table. The hands of someone who worked for a living, as the competitor's CEO had once noticed, but Caruso noticed it differently. Not as something beneath him. As something real in a room that was normally full of things that weren't. "You spoke Russian to me. In the lobby. I needed you to know I wasn't guessing." "Where did you learn it?" "My grandmother. Brighton Beach. She came from Kiev, but she'd lived in Moscow for 20 years before she emigrated. Russian was the language of her whole life. She taught me from the time I could talk." A beat. He was watching her face. Not the way people looked at her in this building, through her, past her, registering only the uniform and the badge. Actually watching her. "You studied literature. UConn. I graduated with honors." She said it without bitterness, but without softening it either. "But you're here. My mother needed dialysis. 3 sessions a week. The night shift here pays more than most day jobs I could get with a literature degree in this city." He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of discomfort. The silence of someone recalibrating. Of someone taking in information they'd never thought to ask for and realizing how much they'd missed by not asking. "What did you do," he said carefully, "after Garrett turned you away and before you came to Drago?" "I thought about leaving," she said. "I thought about how much I needed this job. I thought about the fact that nobody in this building was going to believe me." A pause. "And then I thought, someone is about to die. And I'll know I could have stopped it. So I can't leave." Caruso Vitali had sat across from world leaders, hostile shareholders, men who had looked him in the eye and tried to take everything he'd built. He had never once felt the particular quality of silence he felt now. Like the room had gotten quieter and cleaner all at once. "Why?" he said. Not "why did you warn me?" He meant something deeper than that. She seemed to understand. "Because it was right," she said simply. His jaw shifted. Something in his chest did too, something he hadn't felt move in a very long time. The radio crackled again. 3 of the Russian operatives had been detained in the north stairwell and the building parking level. Drago stepped forward. "Sir. Morozov's men. 2 confirmed, 1 additional. All in custody. NYPD en route." Caruso didn't look at Drago. He was still looking at Selene. "Thank you," he said. Quiet. Certain. Like he was learning the words for the first time and wanted to make sure he said them correctly. Selene nodded. And for the first time in 26 months of invisible nights in this building, she felt, completely, undeniably, seen. 3 days after the bomb disposal unit had declared the private bay of Vitali Tower safe, Caruso sat alone in his 47th floor office and stared at a file he couldn't stop opening. It wasn't the investigative report on Morozov's network, though that file was 2 inches thick and sat to his left. It wasn't the damage assessment on the 3 compromised security personnel, now in federal custody. It was a single-page HR document. Employee record. Carter, Selene, night maintenance, floors 38 to 42. Employed 26 months. Performance reviews, exceptional. Attendance, perfect. Emergency contact, 1 name. Lorraine Carter, mother. He closed the file. Opened it again. He was not a man given to distraction. He had built Vitali Capital from a single office in Connecticut with $12,000 and a willingness to work 20 hours a day for 3 years straight. He understood leverage, risk, and the cold calculus of where to place attention. He understood that sentiment was a liability. He had believed all of that for 37 years. And then a woman with a mop handle and perfect Russian had walked across his lobby and turned the whole architecture of his certainty to dust. His intercom buzzed. His assistant's voice came through. "Mr. Vitali, your 4 o'clock is here. Tell them 15 minutes. He stood. Walked to the window. New York spread below him in its indifferent vastness, 10 million people moving through their lives, none of them knowing or caring that 3 days ago this tower had nearly become a crime scene. He thought about what Selene had said. Because it was right, 4 words. No performance. No expectation of reward. Just 4 words that hit harder than anything said in this office in years. He pressed the intercom. "Also, get me the direct contact for Selene Carter." "The maintenance employee, sir." "Yes." A pause that lasted 1 second longer than it should have. "Of course." That evening, Selene was on the 39th floor with her cart when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. She had been fielding calls all week, HR, a detective from the NYPD's organized crime division, her mother calling every day to make sure she was safe. She picked up. "Ms. Carter." The voice was unmistakable. Low, even, exact. Her hand tightened on the phone. "Mr. Vitali. I want to speak with you." "Not officially. Not with HR present." "A beat. Would you be willing to meet me on the 47th floor? When your shift ends." She looked down the corridor. The buffer machine humming. The empty marble gleaming back at her. She thought about what it would cost her. Then she thought about the fact that 3 days ago she'd stepped in front of a billionaire in a lobby with nothing but a mop handle and the truth. This was considerably less dangerous. "When my shift ends," she said. "Yes." At 11:58, Selene Carter stepped off the executive elevator onto the 47th floor for the first time in her life. The office was enormous and quiet, floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides, the whole of Manhattan laid out below like a map of something impossible and beautiful, the kind of view that made you understand why people wanted to own things. Caruso was standing by the window. He'd removed his jacket. His sleeves were rolled up. He turned when she came in and for a moment neither of them spoke. "You came," he said. "I said I would." He gestured to the chairs by the window. They sat across from each other again, like in the conference room 3 days ago. But this time there was no radio. No Drago. No emergency. Just the city below and the strange electric quiet between 2 people who had been through something together and hadn't yet found the language for what it had made them. "I read your file," he said. "I know." He looked at her. "Literature degree. UConn, honors. You've been working nights for 26 months. Your mother's on dialysis." "That's correct." "Why didn't you go back to school?" "Graduate program, teaching, something, because," she said quietly, "the thing about surviving is that it doesn't always leave room for the thing after surviving." He was still for a moment. "Then, I want to talk to you about that. Mr. Vitali, Caruso." She met his eyes. He didn't look away. Something in the air between them shifted, the way pressure shifts before a storm, barely perceptible, completely undeniable. "Caruso," she said. And somehow his name in her voice was the most disarming thing that had happened to him in years. He leaned forward slightly. "I've been thinking about what you said. About doing what was right. About the cost of it not being the point." She waited. "I haven't operated that way," he said. "For most of my life, everything has been about the cost. The calculation. The return. People included." She didn't soften it for him. "I know. You've been in this building 26 months. Yes. I never asked your name." "No." The city hummed below them. He looked at her with an openness that didn't sit naturally on his face. You could see him choosing it, deciding to let it stay. "I'm asking now," he said. "Tell me about yourself, Selene Carter. Not the file. You. She looked at him for a long time. The Manhattan skyline behind him. The rolled-up sleeves. The man who had ordered the evacuation of a city block with 3 words and then sat across from her in a conference room like she was the most important person in it. She made a decision. She started to talk. They were there until 2 in the morning. And neither of them noticed the time passing. 6 weeks later, New York was doing what New York does in early spring, half the city still in coats, the other half in denial, the air carrying that particular electricity that feels like something is about to begin. Selene stood in the lobby of Vitali Tower, not with a cart. Not with a mop. In a blazer she'd bought on a Thursday because Caruso had asked her to a dinner and she'd stood in the store for 20 minutes before choosing it and then walked home smiling in a way that embarrassed her and she did it anyway. A lot of things were different now. Her mother's dialysis was fully covered, Caruso had quietly restructured the company's medical support fund 3 weeks ago, and Lorraine Carter's treatment was among the first cases it addressed. He hadn't told Selene. She'd found out from her mother, who had called crying on a Tuesday afternoon, and Selene had sat on her studio apartment floor and held the phone against her chest for a long time. He hadn't asked for credit. That was the thing about Caruso Vitali that nobody who only read the business press would ever know. When he decided to be a different kind of man, he did it completely. No announcement. No press release. Just action. She had seen him transform over 6 weeks in the way that only people who are genuinely paying attention get to see, not the public version, the private one. The man who had started holding the elevator for the maintenance staff. The man who had called Rodriguez into his office one afternoon and shaken his hand in front of the entire security team and said plainly that competence deserved recognition. The man who sat across from her at a window table at a quiet restaurant in Washington Heights and listened to her talk about her grandmother's kitchen and her mother's laugh and the literature degree she still wanted to use someday, and looked at her like every word was a thing worth keeping. They had dinner. Then they had dinner again. And again. Then one evening he'd walked her home through the West Village and at the door of her building he'd stopped and she'd looked up at him in the amber light and he'd said, very quietly, "I'm not good at this." "I know," she'd said. "I've been watching you figure it out. You're doing fine." He'd laughed. Actually laughed, not the controlled, corporate version but a real one that loosened something in his whole face. And she'd thought, there he is. The person under the empire. Tonight, they were in his car. The new one. Drago driving. The city streaming past the windows in its brilliant indifferent way. Caruso had his hand over hers on the seat between them. Not dramatically. Just, there. Warm. Present. She looked at him in profile. The sharp jaw. The tired eyes that weren't as tired as they used to be. "What are you thinking?" he asked without looking at her. She smiled. "That I almost didn't say anything that night." He turned. His eyes found hers in the city-lit dark of the car. "But you did." "I did." He lifted her hand. Looked at it for a moment, the same hands he had noticed in the conference room, the hands that had held a mop handle and a phone and somehow, against every odd this city and this building had stacked against her, had reached out and changed the course of his life. He pressed his lips to her knuckles. Simple. Quiet. The most deliberate thing he'd ever done. "Selene." "Yes. I see you." 3 words. She felt them in her sternum. In the place where 26 months of invisible nights had left a mark she hadn't known was still there until it stopped aching. Outside, Manhattan swept past in its relentless luminous sprawl. Somewhere in a federal holding facility, Morozov's men were awaiting trial. Somewhere in Brighton Beach, in the apartment where a grandmother had once taught a small girl to speak in 2 languages, a different kind of legacy was still alive. And in the back of a car on a spring night in New York, a woman who had been nobody pressed her head against the shoulder of a man who was learning, slowly and deliberately and for the first time in his life, how to be someone. They had started with a bomb. They had ended with this. And this, the warmth, the stillness, the weight of finally being known, was worth every single second of every invisible night that had led her here. If this story moved you, if you've ever been the person in the room no one looked at, the one who did what was right when no one was watching, drop a heart in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because Caruso and Selene's story isn't over. Some things are only the beginning.